Hello there, welcome to the pod. So, you hear it all the time. Processed foods are unhealthy. And I don't think that I need to put a convincing argument together for that because 99% of folks are all in agreement there. But I want to outline the issues with processed food intake for fat loss specifically from a practical implementation standpoint in terms of getting results aside from health. And the reason is, I think that we hear don't eat processed foods so often that our eyes just tend to sort of glaze over and we're like, yeah, I know. And then we just go and eat them anyway. And so I want to go through step by step exactly why it is so beneficial to favor single ingredient whole foods and minimize processed foods when your goal is to lose fat and keep it off, because it is not just about health. We all know that processed foods are unhealthy and single ingredient whole foods are healthy, generally speaking. So we're going to curb the health convo just for a sec and look at our food choices purely from a I want sustainable fat loss results standpoint. So let's dig in. Now, every aspect that I'm going to address here is going to overlap with one another to a degree. However, I'm going to do my best to separate out each part and explain it on its own just so that you can clearly understand each segment and then how it fits in with the bigger picture. So you're a regular listener to the pod and you know that we need to create a calorie deficit in order to lose fat. Or in other words, we need to use more energy than we take in at the end of the day. And there are exactly 0 exceptions to this rule. Every single human that has ever lived that has lost fat did it via this mechanism. And so being that that's the case, we are going to circle back to this guiding principle throughout our chat. Meaning, calories matter, of course, right? And when we look at processed foods generally, they are far higher in calories than unprocessed foods or single ingredient whole foods. For example, if we have a fist-sized portion, however big or small your fist is, of cooked chicken breast, and we compare it to a fist-sized portion of breaded chicken, the single ingredient whole foods version, which is the straight up chicken breast, is going to be lower in calories than the fist-sized portion of breaded chicken, despite it being the same physical amount of food, because the straight up chicken breast is still in its original form, which contains protein, a small amount of fat, 0 carbs, and a whole bunch of water. The breaded chicken, on the other hand, is not in its original form. Shocker, that's not how chicken is in nature. It does contain protein, but less of it. It contains more fat because of the added oils, and it also has carbohydrates in the form of breading or breadcrumbs. If we look at a fist-sized portion of potatoes versus French fries, same idea. Potatoes have 1 ingredient, and they contain a tiny bit of protein. They're predominantly carbohydrates, and they have virtually no fat in them. Whereas French fries have a whole bunch of ingredients. They're also low in protein and higher in carbs, but the kicker is that they have a lot of added fat, primarily via funky vegetable oils, which drives up the calorie count like crazy. Now, these are just 2 super simple examples. But if we take just about any processed version of a food, it's almost always going to have more calories than the unprocessed version, despite having the same portion size. And so in terms of calorie count, processed foods are much higher than single ingredient whole foods. And remember, calorie counts are crucial because we have to be in a calorie deficit to lose fat. And therefore, purely from an energy intake standpoint, single ingredient whole foods are going to put us in a far better position. Now let's move on to satiation, or how full we feel eating single ingredient whole foods versus processed foods. And this is where things get really interesting. A fist-sized portion of chicken breast is lower in calories than a fist-sized portion of breaded chicken. And yet, the straight-up chicken breast is almost certainly going to provide you with more satiation, despite it being the same portion and even fewer calories. That's fascinating, right? Because you are consuming fewer calories via the chicken breast, however, you feel more full. But why? A few reasons. One, protein is the most filling macronutrient, and the protein content in that portion of chicken breast is going to be higher than in the breaded chicken because the chicken breast is pure chicken, whereas the breaded stuff has all sorts of other ingredients, quote unquote, taking up room or diluting it, which lowers the protein content. Secondly, increased palatability. The other ingredients in the breaded chicken or in the French fries that we chatted about increase the palatability, which is just a fancy word for taste. Now, don't get me wrong, we don't have to eat bland and plain chicken breast with bland and plain potatoes to get in shape. I'm just illustrating a bigger point via these examples. That is not necessary. But if the palatability of our diet is too high via our food choices, not only is the food itself less filling and higher in calories, it simultaneously drives us to eat more because it tastes so darn good. For example, if someone said to you, I will give you $100 for every fist-sized portion that you eat of either chicken breast with potato or breaded chicken with French fries, you're going to choose the breaded chicken with fries because it's far easier to eat way more of, because you're going to eat some of the chicken breast with potato, and let's say it's spiced up nicely, and just be good. You're going to feel satiated and simply not want any more. On the other hand, you're going to eat some of the breaded chicken with fries and feel satiated at some point and not want any more, but it's going to be after consuming way more calories, which dovetails into aspect number 3, which is palate fatigue. You're going to want to stop eating far earlier when going for spiced up chicken breast and potato than you would going for the breaded chicken and fries, because with single ingredient whole foods, your taste buds and your body just know when they've had enough. However, with the breaded chicken and fries, you're able to override your palate to a degree and eat far more, hence the term hyperpalatable processed foods. Processed food manufacturers know this. They study evolutionary biology, and so they've established something called the bliss point. And the bliss point is the perfect amount of salt, sugar, fat, flavorings, etc. that has a food taste as good as possible, which results in us eating a ton of it. For example, they create foods with varying ratios of salt, sugar, fat, flavorings, and the like, put groups of people in rooms and actually have them rate which versions taste the best, along with tracking how much they actually eat, and then they use that data to inform them of which combination of ingredients will make their customer the happiest. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. It's not big corporations being evil. They're just a business, and their customers want the most tasty foods. But therein lies the issue. They are so good and so high in calories, and they override our natural satiation signals and delay that palate fatigue to such a degree that voila, we have an obesity epidemic. Now, I want to give you a clear example of the layering of this whole processed foods concept, because I think that it'll provide you with a helpful way to think about what you are eating, satiation, and palate fatigue in general. Popcorn is a cool way to illustrate this. Plain popcorn without anything added. You're not going to eat very much of it. It's dry, it's bland, but what if we add some butter? that makes it a lot tastier, and we'll surely be able to eat more buttered popcorn than we would plain popcorn. What if we add butter and salt? Even tastier, which means that we'll eat even more. What if we put butter, salt, and some caramel into the popcorn? Most folks are going to eat even more of that version. What if we add butter, salt, caramel, and some M&Ms or a hint of chocolate? I think that you get the idea. As we increase ingredients and processing, we bump up the calorie count while simultaneously decreasing how filling that food is per portion, which drives us to eat even more of it. Meaning, oftentimes eating more calories has us eat more calories. How wild is that? So when we look at total calories in whole foods versus processed foods, we see that processed foods are much higher despite the same physical volume of food. When we look at how filling those calories are, whole foods take the cake without a doubt. And when we compare the two from a palate fatigue angle, we hit that point where our bodies say, I'm good, far earlier via whole foods. Here's another interesting variable, and I'm sure that you've experienced this before. You're totally satisfied. You just had a super nutrient-dense filling meal made up of a coconut curry with salmon, rice, and veggies in it, let's say. And someone says, do you want another serving? And you're like, no thanks. And then someone is like, how about a steak and potato? You're like, no, I don't want that. I'm really full. And then someone says, how about ice cream? And you're like, that I could do. This is the second stomach phenomenon, but it typically doesn't apply to single ingredient whole foods. It only applies to these hyper palatable processed products that can override our satiation signals. Now, here is what makes this even crazier. You may have like a bite or two of the ice cream, and it's almost as if that hyper palatable food re-stimulates your appetite, and you actually feel less full after that bite or two than if you had not had any ice cream at all. How wild is that? Again, eating hyper palatable calories can actually re-stimulate your appetite and ramp up your desire for food like crazy. Calories are meant to satiate you, and in a case like this, it can literally be the opposite. Like we said, these foods are designed in labs to override our brains, our bodies, and our taste buds so that we eat the maximum amount of them. And I say foods, but they're really products because they're not food. Mother Nature makes food, companies make products. Also, it's quite the coincidence that protein is the most filling macronutrient, and processed foods are almost always extremely low in protein. Why? Too much protein would alter the taste of the product, but also too much protein would fill us up faster, and we wouldn't want that, right? Now, I am definitely not saying that you can never eat processed foods again if you want to get in shape. What I'm saying is that these are the problems associated with processed foods when your goal is to lose fat and keep it off. And it comes full circle to the calories in, calories out concept. However, as you can see, there is a whole bunch of nuance in the middle that alters this equation. And the way that we can tip the equation in our favor for fat loss is to minimize processed foods and favor single ingredient whole foods as much as possible. And it's not because processed foods are inherently bad, wrong, and if you eat them, you're somehow immoral or a piece of shit. No, we're just looking at this from a purely how to get results standpoint. Whole foods are also, of course, healthier. They're much more nutrient dense, which may actually play a role in satiation itself. They are far more digestion friendly, which is the key to big picture health, by the way. And so I would recommend favoring whole foods, whether you care about maximizing fat loss and or your health. But fortunately, it's a two birds, one stone situation. Now, if you find that when you eat single ingredient whole foods that they taste really bland and plain, this will change. And you can think about it like alcohol. If you drink fairly often, it's going to take more alcohol to feel a buzz. But if you drink really infrequently, a single bevy or maybe two might give you a really nice kick. It's the same idea with processed foods versus whole foods. If you're eating processed foods super regularly, single ingredient whole foods may taste kind of bland. But if you scale back your processed food intake, you're going to be tasting whole foods like you never have before. I've experienced this personally, and so have tons of my clients. What often actually happens is that my clients scale back their processed food intake. They begin tasting whole foods like they're meant to be tasted because they're not slamming the shit out of their taste buds every day. And so their palate becomes more refined. And then when they go for a treat meal or some hyper palatable food, it often doesn't actually taste nearly as good as they remember it because it's like aggressively salty, sugary, fatty, etc. This doesn't happen for everyone, but it is quite common. And so point being, if whole foods don't taste great at the moment, they will. And it tends to take not all that much time either. Your taste buds will be sensitizing within a week or two. Fortunately, it is very fast. Also, just be sure that you're not limiting yourself to plain chicken breast, broccoli, and rice. Use your whole spice rack, salt included, because it is different when you're adding salt to a whole food meal versus the combo of salt, sugar, fat, flavorings, etc. in processed food. So don't fear salt. There are plenty of sauces that you can use and whole food sources of fat like butter and avocado and coconut milk and various oils. Healthful eating can be absolutely delicious. More delicious oftentimes than processed foods after you resensitize your taste buds. So, hypothetically, even if you didn't care about your health in the slightest and all you cared about was your body composition, you'd still want to favor single ingredient whole foods because it is the most effective way to work with your body and keep your calorie intake in check. But fortunately, you'd still reap the health benefits regardless because they are baked into the cake via all of these amazing whole foods that Mother Nature designed for us. If you're interested in applying for one-on-one nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can click the link in the description below or head on over to n1fitness.com/coaching. On Instagram, I'm at n1fitness. On TikTok, I'm at the n1fitness. And on YouTube, I'm Marcus Sadu /n1fitness. Feel free to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform if you'd like to, and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope that you found this episode useful, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya!